Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, welcome to this very special online Golden Pen of Freedom ceremony. My name is Vincent Perrin. I'm the CEO of WAN-IFRA, the World News Publishers Association. It has been an exceptional year for all of us, a year that has brought much pain and suffering to so many. We hope that everyone in our global community stays safe and well. But of course, we recognize media professionals have been on the front line since the beginning of this crisis, reporting the COVID pandemic from all its many angles. As an organization, we stand in solidarity with those who throughout this time have continued to deliver the news and send our condolences to all those affected by the virus, particularly the families and loved ones of those who may have lost their lives. The world is a changed place, and it remains to be seen just how and when we will get back to some form of normality. Among the many things to have been disrupted by the pandemic, our World News Media Congress. And this is why our Golden Pen of Freedom Award ceremony is taking place today online, as opposed to forming the heart of our annual showcase event. We were scheduled to be in Zaragoza, celebrating with our host NAO, WAN-IFRA President Fernando de Yarza, and friends from AMI, the Spanish News Media Association. Sadly, it was not to be. But despite our disappointment at not bringing the world's media to Spain in 2020, the warm welcome that was being prepared still awaits you as we look forward to returning to Zaragoza in 2022. The Golden Pen of Freedom is WAN-IFRA's most prestigious award, recognizing the outstanding actions in writing or deed of an individual, a group, or an institution in the cause of press freedom. Behind the names of the laureate lie stories of extraordinary personal courage and self-sacrifice, stories of jail, beatings, bombings, censorship, exile, and in some cases murder. The first pen was awarded to Turkish journalist Ahmet Hamid Yalman back in 1961. In the years since, it has been handed to some of the most prestigious, if not the most courageous names in journalism. Those who with vital world kept the flame of press freedom burning, often in the face of incredible challenges, both personal and professional. This year's laureate, I assure you, is no exception. Before I hand over to Warren Fernandez, President of the World Editors Forum, who will reveal our 2020 winner, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for joining us today and for your continued support during these extremely difficult times. The Golden Pen is always a pertinent moment to remind ourselves of the importance of coming together by whatever means, through whichever channel, in solidarity. An opportunity to put differences aside and celebrate press freedom, an ideal bigger than our individual selves, yet which forms the cornerstone of every decision we make as news professionals. Today, the need for community and shared ideals is perhaps more urgent than any other moment since 1948, WAN-IFRA's years of foundation. Then, as now, with society rebuilding and looking for new hope, we find the role of professional media increasingly vital. We remain, as we have been for 72 years, by your side to accompany you in facing whatever challenges may lie ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, from Singapore, Warren Fernandez. Thank you.
Good evening, Their Majesties, the King and Queen of Spain, Excellencies, fellow editors and journalists, ladies and gentlemen. COVID-19 has robbed us all of our freedom. We are unable to move around the world as freely as we have grown used to. So unfortunately, I'm here in Singapore, speaking to you from my newsroom of the Straits Times, unable to be with you in Spain. Even at home, we can't meet friends and family as we please, to hug and to hold, without mask, without fear of what we might be picking up or passing on. Along with the coronavirus, another pandemic of misinformation and fake news has been unleashed. In the process, our audiences and communities have found themselves hard-pressed to tell if they can believe what they read, and perhaps even what they see. And as the economic impact of the outbreak takes its toll, our newsrooms have been starved of revenues and resources. The result? Jobs, livelihoods, and in some cases, even the very existence of our newsrooms have been put at grave risk. Meanwhile, populists, racists, autocrats, and demagogues are on the march in parts of the world, emboldened by the anxieties and the confusion of the times. As the poet Yeats put it, things fall apart. The center cannot hold. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And in the face of these pressures, many in the media are finding their ability to operate cabined, cribbed, confined, to borrow the words of Shakespeare. The bitter irony is this: never before have audiences turned to our newsroom in such great numbers and in such need for credible, reliable information, to help them make sense of developments, to separate fact from fiction, to figure out how to protect themselves and their families, their livelihoods, and their lives. Never before has the work of professional newsrooms and credible media been more vital to the health and well-being of our societies. As journalists and editors, we have to take courage, we have to persevere, and we have to carry on in the face of our challenges and adversities. So it is fitting that today we come together to honor one of our very own and her amazing story of courage and perseverance. In the face of unspeakable crimes, personal suffering, and humiliation, she has refused to be cowed and silenced. She continues to speak out and speak up against corruption, abuse of power and violence, against women, and against journalists. I'm speaking, of course, of the winner of our Golden Pen of Freedom this year, Ms. Jineth Bedoya Lima. On the 25th of May, 2000, while investigating reports of alleged arms sales between paramilitaries and state officials for her newspaper El Espectador, she went to the notorious La Modelo prison in Bogota for an interview. It was a trap. Now, this is how she recounts what happened in several interviews. When I got to the prison entrance, a woman asked if I was the journalist. I was about to answer when a man came, put his arm around my waist, a gun to my side, and said he would kill me if I did not start walking. He tied my hands and feet, blindfolded me, and put me in a truck. We drove for a long time. I was taken to a warehouse where there were other men, and that is when they started torturing me. I was beaten, kicked in the head, in the body, in the stomach, on the legs. They told me that the press is evil in this country. Pay attention, we are sending a message to the press. And they beat me up, they grabbed me by the hair, they raped me. After some time, Jineth was driven to another location and dumped, naked, by the roadside. Amazingly, despite this harrowing experience, she was back at her desk in the newsroom 2 weeks later. She said nothing, but went back to the beat, covering crimes and misdemeanors in Colombia as before. Outside of her work, though, she began meeting other women who had suffered similar experiences for her own reasons, not for work, she says. 3 years later, in 2003, this time while working for El Tiempo, and as she was traveling with a photographer to meet members of the FARC, the former Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, she was again abducted and held for 8 days this time. She says, "We were kidnapped, held this time, not raped, but humiliated and beaten." For 6 more years, Jineth continued to work as a journalist, but hardly spoke a word publicly about what had happened to her. Finally, in 2009, she decided to break her silence. This is how she explains why in an interview with The Guardian. "I had met so many women who had experiences similar to mine, yet the state would not recognize these crimes. No one wanted to look into it or even to talk about it. When I wanted to pursue my own case and contacted the police hospital for evidence, it had all been destroyed." That year, she decided to launch the No Es Hora de Callar campaign to denounce the systemic impunity in cases of sexual violence amid Colombia's internal war. 3 long years later, in 2012, the Colombian public prosecutor finally recognized her torture and sexual assault as a crime against humanity. In 2016, she was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for her work in defense of women's rights and against gender violence and impunity in Colombia. In a landmark ruling in 2019, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights held the Colombian state responsible for the acts committed against her nearly 2 decades ago, and it referred her case to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. In April this year, Jineth was awarded the 2020 Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Prize. Her struggle for justice, her own, as well as for women around the world who have suffered sexual violence, continues, as well as her work as a journalist at El Tiempo, where she is today deputy editor. Often, when asked by interviewers how she survived those very dark days of captivity and torture, and how she kept going, her replies have been clear and consistent. I will not be silenced. I choose to survive, to keep doing journalism. At a time when journalists, women, and minorities are under such great threat of violence, oppression, and discrimination in so many places around the world, the courage and conviction of Jineth Bedoya Lima is a shining inspiration. We will all do well to remember those resounding words of hers. I will not be silenced. I choose to survive, to keep doing journalism. And we can find great solace and strength in them. In the difficult days ahead, as we continue to grapple with COVID-19, we will have to rebuild and reinvigorate our ravaged newsrooms. We will have to find new ways to sustain them and keep them going, to choose to survive, to keep doing journalism in the interests of the communities that we serve. Yet, daunting as the challenges might be, eventually, this pandemic will pass. But for some of our colleagues around the world, the scourge of violence and intimidation, the arrests and killings of reporters, and the brazen attempt to undermine the credibility of our journalists and newsrooms will continue. This year, another 17 of our colleagues have been killed while doing their jobs in places like Mexico, Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Unfortunately, there is neither a vaccine nor an antidote against corruption and abuse of power, racism or sexual harassment, populism, and demagoguery. Among the ways of inoculating our societies against these lingering ills, I believe, is the promotion of openness, inclusivity, and understanding, upholding facts and truth, striving for fairness, objectivity, and balance, or in other words, safeguarding good journalism. In a few days' time, on September 28th, we will mark World News Day. Some 100 newsrooms from around the world will stand together to showcase the work of professional journalists, the impact we can have, and the differences we can make to the health and well-being of our societies. We will tell the stories of the many brave men and women around the world who, in the face of relentless pressures, whether it is legal or commercial, physical or mental, real or virtual, be it from states or individuals, nonetheless declare, as Jeanette does, time and again, we will not be silenced. We choose to survive, to keep doing journalism. And in doing so, we will all draw great courage, hope, and inspiration from the life and work of our winner of the Golden Pen of Freedom 2020, Miss Jineth Bedoya Lima. Thank you.
Sus Majestades los Reyes de España, amigos y amigas de WAN-IFRA, queridos colegas periodistas de todo el mundo.
Dear colleagues and friends of the world, and hello everybody that is connected to us right now. On May the 25th, 2000, I understood the magnitude of what it meant to be a journalist. Whilst my kidnappers were taking me to the place where they tortured and raped me, the recurring and painful thought in my head was that I would have to leave the newsroom of El Espectador to see myself forced to abandon my notebooks, my interviews, and all the material I had collected up to that point in time. I understood that it was doing my job with honesty that had led me to that point. And after long hours in which I just wanted to die, journalism also made me understand that I had a drive to keep going. The love for my craft gave me the strength to stand up. I did it in the belief that through my writing and my research work, I would be able to find the resolve to take the next step. And so I did. That's why I'm here today. To look back is to rediscover the greatness of what communicating really means. But the cost has not been any less than the passion for my work. My colleagues and I, both in the newsroom of the El Espectador newspaper and for the last 18 years in El Tiempo, had to overcome many obstacles and threats and intimidations in order to exercise an independent journalism committed to the people. Fighting for the freedom of the press means that there's stigmatization, and many times people don't believe you. But it is undoubtedly the best letter of recommendation that journalists can have. A job that is untainted by political and ideological convictions that ought to be his or her roadmap. This is precisely the great challenge we are living in these times, when new means of communicating compel us to play a leading role in terms of innovation. The shift from print to digital requires us to act with greater accountability to our audiences and to gauge ourselves as information professionals. And this was mentioned by Grzegorz Kapuscinski. Before being journalists, we are human beings. And this is what we must implement in our daily work, placing ourselves in the shoes of that other who is in front of our microphone, our camera, at the other end of the notes that we will turn into stories. That has to count for more than the immediacy to which social networks lead us. Immediacy and quality, this has to be a perfect marriage in our profession, together with the research and ethics. And these are the backbone of the work to be done by a journalist, because what we cannot allow is that we hide the freedom of the press behind harmful information for those people that read and listen to us. And this is perhaps the biggest element of this award. In other words, the theme that I can believe more and have less doubts, so that I can address the new technological realities properly, and above all, so that I can ratify the major social responsibility that journalism has. I was a young dreamer as a reporter when they tried to silence me, and I had to become the news itself to understand that a story in a newspaper maybe wasn't going to change the world, but it didn't have the power of transforming somebody's reality. Fighting against the impunity of my case made the word dignity my hallmark, and journalism became my vindication. Freedom of the press is one of the most precious rights, but above all, it brings with it one of the greatest duties, that is, not to be silenced. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure the virtual applause
Damas y caballeros,
is now resounding. They would be more than justified. And I'd like to once again congratulate Jineth Bedoya Lima and thank her for such a moving, powerful speech. Jeanette, we welcome you to the WAN-IFRA family and stand firmly by your side as you continue your fight for justice. I look forward to the time when we can acknowledge your achievement in person. Thank you also to Warren Fernandez and our World Editors Forum board members, many of whom are online with us today, and who were instrumental in nominating Jeanette for this year's Golden Pen Award. More than ever, speaking truth to power is a risky business. for individuals, for media organizations, for those who care about challenging injustice and righting the wrongs of our world. Physical attacks against those who stand for truth, good journalism, and the right to freedom of expression persist. Online actions fuel often devastating real-world consequences. COVID has brought the perilous state of the economic model sharply into focus. These has repercussions for every aspect of our industry, including the freedoms on which our professional relies. The simple reality, if we lose independent media, the press freedom fight only gets harder. The principles underpinning a democratic world guaranteeing rights for all more difficult to ensure. So where do we go from here? What are our main challenges? What are the solutions? How can we broaden the support to press freedom? To explore all this, I'd like now to hand you over to Mexico and Javier Garza, also a board member of our World Editors Forum, who will lead our live online discussion on what is next for press freedom. Javier.
Thank you, Vincent, and welcome to everybody to this panel with really three remarkable people, two very remarkable journalists, and also we're going to hear from the other side, from the advertising and business side, and see how we can fuse every possible point of view. Congratulations again to Jeanette Bedoya. It's great to have two of the latest Golden Pen winners in this panel today, Jeanette this year and Maria Reza, who won it a couple of years ago in another time when we could actually still get together. I will introduce our panelists briefly. First, of course, Jeanette Bedoya, Deputy Editor of El Tiempo. She's a renowned journalist and international speaker on topics such as armed conflict, drug trafficking, and gender issues. Jeanette was nominated for the 2016 Nobel Peace Prize for her work in defense of women's rights as a result of her campaign against gender violence and impunity in Colombia, called No es hora de callar, it's not time to be silent, that she launched in 2009. The same year her case went public, she was kidnapped, tortured, and abused, as we have all heard, because of her work as a reporter during Colombia's armed conflict. She was, of course, awarded today with the Golden Pen of Freedom, and this year she was also honored by UNESCO with its Guillermo Cano Award, and she's joining us from Colombia. Jeanette, bienvenida. Maria Reza, she is executive editor and CEO of Rappler, the top digital-only news site that is leading the fight for press freedom in the Philippines. She is a Time Person of the Year for 2018, Golden Pen of Freedom laureate in 2018 as well. Maria has endured constant political harassment and arrest by the government of Rodrigo Duterte in Filipinas, forced to post bail 8 times just to stay free. Rappler's battle for truth and democracy is also the subject of the 2020 Sundance Film Festival documentary, 1,000 Cuts. She is joining us from the Philippines. Maria, good evening over there. And finally, John Montgomery, who is the Executive Vice President for Brand Safety at Group M. He is a leading voice in the advertising world. He joined WPP's Ogilvy agency in South Africa in 1989 and has been involved in several of the company's projects and companies such as Mindshare and Group M, where he was appointed Executive Vice President in 2016. John is an industry leader with a deep understanding of how brands, agencies, media, and technology intersect, and he has devoted part of his work to figuring out how agencies and advertisers can help promote journalism, especially local journalism. He has served on the Internet Steering Committee of the World Economic Forum and as co-chair of the Trustworthy Accountability Group, an anti-piracy initiative. He's joining us from the United States. John, good morning over there.
Good morning.
And we will begin this panel with Jeanette. First, as Vincent said, I'm Javier Garza. I'm a journalist in Mexico, board member of the World Economic Forum, and I have had the privilege of collaborating with WAN-IFRA for the last couple of years as an advisor on newsroom safety. Some of the questions will, of course, be revolving not only about press freedom and the threats to press freedom, but also about how we can sustain journalism, which is also a necessary condition for maintaining press freedom. The first question, the first topic is for Jeanette, Jeanette Bedoya, and talking about this international recognition that goes to the heart of some of the work that she has been engaged in for more than a decade, and also makes visible the threats and risks that journalists face. I am going to switch now to Spanish and talk according to our guest's language. Jeanette, ¿cómo ves ahora la situación de la libertad de prensa en Colombia y alrededor del mundo? Nos interesa particularmente tu punto de vista en función de cuál es el progreso que ves y cuáles son los retrocesos que ves, cuál es el balance que podemos tener este año.
Well, firstly, hello everybody. Hello to everybody that are connected right now. And once again, my thanks to all of our colleagues from the forum and the people that have been nominated me for this major award. I think that the freedom of the press, I think that it's facing one of the biggest challenges of its entire history. And I'm saying that because the new forms of communicating with each other mean that we have to be much more rigorous in whatever we do and whatever we say and how we publish things too. Because there's no doubt that the progress that has been made in terms of freedom of the press are related to the fact that people are less silenced nowadays than in the past. And I think that nowadays there's no doubt that people and journalists are resorting to this right to speak up loud and to safeguard our rights and our duties too. But this space or this new reality that we journalists are facing at an international level mean that we have to deal with other challenges that are financial, for instance, or economic, because this is obviously applying lots of pressure through many dictatorial governments where they limit the contents of the press and also the new trends that we're seeing all over the world. It was only a couple of days ago when UNESCO released its report on the risks that journalists are facing as regards information connected to protest movements. The fact that they have to expose themselves because they are not only stigmatized because they are covering these protests, but they also have to suffer from arrests and physical violence exerted whilst they are working. And that means that we have 125 journalists that have been victim of this violence in these last few years as regards their work, their journalism. And then there's also a lack of guarantees too in the case of these governments, because unfortunately they still don't understand that the freedom of the press is one of the fundamental rights of our citizens. And I dare say that these are some of the biggest risks that the press has to cope with right now. And I think that this year in particular, I think that the situation that we are experiencing because of this health issue we have all over the world has now posed new challenges, but we are also facing new threats. And this is where I think that the newsrooms have to be very, very accurate. They have to be very, very precise in how they manage the teams of journalists, but they also have to guarantee and make sure that the information that we are delivering to our audience is completely rigorous and completely truthful, now more than ever before. Our audience needs a journalism that bears in mind this mandate that we have as regards communicating things properly. We have a very long way to go, there's no doubt about it. But I think that the fact that we can resort nowadays to these new ways of communicating with our audience also provide us a guarantee as regards the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press. And I think that this is, I'm referring to the authorities and to the police and to the armies and to the state attorney, but I also think that this should be taken into account by the people that read our newspapers. We have to protect that major treasure we have, which is the freedom to deliver information.
Creo que la pandemia y este año realmente nos ha hecho ver con más claridad el valor y la importancia que tiene el periodismo independiente. Y vamos a tocar el tema un poco más adelante. Quisiera ahora pasar con María Reza. Go to the other side of the world, Maria, to the Philippines, because this year has been extremely challenging for Rappler and for you personally. And the Philippines is one of the most cited cases of threats to press freedom globally. Many of us here are familiar with the tax cases, the cyber libel cases, and the convictions that you suffered. Where do things currently stand, and what are you facing next? And as we know that regardless of what happens, we know that you and Rappler will continue to speak in truth to power. But how do you see yourself doing it from now on?
Thank you. Nice to see you again, even though it is virtually. And congratulations, Jeanette. Congratulations. Amazing. It's great to hear about everything that you've done and continue to do. You know, I have 8 criminal cases that are ongoing, and collectively the maximum sentence is almost 100 years. Hopefully I don't have to deal with that, right? And even if I did, then it's beyond my lifetime. But anyway, what do we have to deal with? Like Jeanette said, the pandemic has actually allowed the Duterte administration to consolidate power, and it has. During this lockdown, this is our 26th week of a lockdown, they actually did something that would have been unthinkable before we were forced to stay at home, which is to shut down the largest broadcaster in the Philippines. ABS-CBN was, you know, it's not the first time it happened. The last time was in 1972 when Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law. And that network was shuttered for 14 years. So here we are again. There's a veneer of democracy, but the law has been weaponized. The franchise was denied. We have a captured legislature. I like the last part of your question, which is how are you going to continue working? Exactly as we always have. Just like Jeanette says, you have to keep going, right? And especially now at this moment, for me, I think, you know, globally, it's not just each of us in our country, but globally, we are at an existential moment because the major distribution platforms, our journalists have lost our gatekeeping powers that has gone to tech. And unfortunately, the social media platforms which distribute the news are biased against journalists. They're biased against facts. In fact, lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further on social media. That's by design. So this is a problem. You can't have democracy if you don't have facts, and we'll continue shining the light.
The tech angle, the part on social media and the tech companies is, I think, one of the most important aspects as we go forward, and I think something that really came to light to evidence in this year. And we'll also get to that in a moment, Maria, because you have been one of the most active voices in talking about the role of tech companies in journalism. But for the moment, let's switch gears a little bit and go to the other side of the world, to John Montgomery. John, I mean, we all know that it's by now a cliche that the traditional business model for journalism is dead or rapidly dying, and this is important because press freedom to thrive means not only the absence of authoritarian control or limits, it also means the ability to sustain itself financially. We have seen advertisers leave news outlets in the traditional format for the greener and cheaper pastures of search engines and social media. This has been accelerated by the pandemic this year. You recently wrote a piece arguing that brands need to reassess their advertising strategies to ensure that dollars flow into high quality journalism. So in essence, companies, business, the corporate world still needs to be a part of the journalism sustainability model, just has to change its the way it does it. What place do you see for them? How do you see them fit beyond the traditional advertising models?
Yeah, thanks, Javier. And firstly, Jeanette, super congratulations. I'm in awe of your bravery, and so thank you for your commitment and your contribution. It inspires me. We've seen the advertising revenue flow out of newspapers, and in particularly local newspapers, as search has taken over from classified advertising and from local advertising. And I think there's a sort of a sense when I speak to newspapers and chief revenue officers of news organizations, there's a sort of an inevitability of, they think that this revenue is flowing out and it's not coming back, and they have to investigate alternative revenue models like subscription. And I think that's fine. It's always good to have an alternative revenue model, but a lot of research shows that the appetite to pay subscriptions for subscriptions amongst most newspaper readers is limited. So most newspaper readers will are prepared to pay for between 1 and 2 subscriptions a year. And if you do the math, that's not going to save news organizations or journalism. And there's still a massive advertising a market out there. Yes, Google and Facebook and Snap and Twitter and TikTok are taking a lot from the advertising pool, but there is still billions and billions and billions of dollars that is available to news organizations. And so what we're saying is that we've recognized that quality, safe content works not only to limit the risk for advertisers, but we've noticed that it's more effective as well. And so there's a large enough body of research evidence to support the notion that news delivers quality, and that an impression in a high quality news environment is worth more than an in-feed fleeting social impression. There's a longer dwell time. Think about the way you read a news article. You spend more time on a single news article than you do perhaps reading a social media post. And so therefore the advertising is on the page for longer. And so we've seen brain maps that show that there's a higher attention to the advertising in a news environment. Also, readers tend to trust their papers, particularly their local papers. It's part of their who they are. And so that trust transfers to the brand, and that's additional value for the brand as well. And so we're trying to help advertisers understand that an impression in news is worth more than an impression elsewhere, and therefore should transfer some of that revenue back into news. It's a tough sell, but it's one I think that we can do. And another thing that has happened during the pandemic is that a lot of advertisers switched off advertising in news because they were worried about advertising next to bad news. And we've done research to show that there's very little evidence to show that the advertising next to news of, for instance, COVID or the pandemic reflects badly on a brand. In fact, in some cases, it reflects better on a brand. The news organization Vice did some research that showed that their advertising in controversial against controversial content, in fact, worked better. So that's somewhat of a myth. And so we're working with advertisers to show them that advertising in those environments can work better. And we've taken a number of actions. I'm happy to talk about them if there's time, but we've taken a number of actions to try and get news remonetized.
Yes, that's I think the other part of this discussion that we really need to talk about, because it's also we've seen it happening around the world, and how journalism is suffering when news organizations have to cut staff or resources. I'm going to switch back to Jeanette. Jeanette, viendo las amenazas al periodismo que vienen no nada más de las agresiones en contra de reporteros, sino también de los medios, me gustaría preguntarte sobre cómo están actualmente la situación en Colombia, porque Colombia es un país que se ha distinguido por un periodismo de gran calidad, de altísima calidad, grandes voces también en defensa de la libertad de prensa, pero bueno, que como en todas partes, pues está sufriendo el impacto económico. Tú trabajas en uno de los medios más importantes de Colombia. Platícanos qué lecciones podemos aprender de lo que está pasando ahí.
We learn from what has happened in your country? Well, as was mentioned before, Javier, I think that we are facing a major challenge as regards the economic situation, because we have to carry out the transition to the digital model with the newspaper. That means that we also have to restructure our newsrooms completely. And it means that we have to walk down a new path to become more sustainable. And we need to discover how we can take that responsibility on board of delivering information with the same level of responsibility, although bearing in mind the fact that we need to have economic resources to get this done. And the paywall, I think, is presenting some historic challenges that we have to cope with, but we also have some needs that have to be addressed. Because to do quality journalism, you also need to have resources at your disposal. And unfortunately, we are still subject to lots of persecution. And we are also generating lots of polemics, lots of controversies between these corrupt politicians and these authorities in these sectors of criminality that want to silence newspapers or the press. And in Colombia, we've had some very difficult months. We've gone through some very difficult months because of certain facts that are posing lots of risks for the freedom of journalism. We know that some journalists are being accused or are being persecuted because they are carrying out lots of research work into situations of corruption. This has been happening for decades, the corruption. And this means that some of the members of the security forces are still monitoring us closely, and they're also intercepting our communications as journalists. But also in the regions, in the distant regions, the same thing is happening too. And journalists are being persecuted, and they're considered to be a threat by the armed forces or the armed groups. Colombia is now in a moment of transition after having signed a peace accord with the FARC. But in any case, let's say that the tone of the struggle against drug trafficking has not lessened. We have more challenges to deal with to do something about delinquency and criminality, and so that we can also do something about all these criminal organizations that still remain after the peace process. So we have to deal with the guerrilla that has still not surrendered its weapons. We also have to do something about one of the armed groups that is supported by FARC, and we have to do something about the criminal gangs that are feeding off drugs and which are still committing crimes on a transnational basis. These are lots of challenges in which the press is deeply involved, unfortunately, because we have the responsibility of delivering information and telling people what's happening. And not only that, but unfortunately, there's also very corrupt sector in the world of politics too, as well as in other institutions that are still causing lots of harm in the country. And this is the challenge that Colombia has to deal with nowadays. And not only that, but we also find that it's very difficult well, considering what's going on an international scale with COVID-19, with the pandemic. And I have to repeat this, it means that we have to deliver fully responsible journalism. And what is our responsibility? Well, we are responsible in terms of our audience. And I would like to say something else, Javier, too. And this is one of the subjects that we sometimes forget about. But as a woman that has survived violence, I have to express this very clearly. I have to say this, and that is that the international press has a major responsibility in terms of gender violence, sexual violence against women and against girls, and gender violence too against women and against girls at an international scale are still one of the worst dramas we have to cope with. And now with the pandemic, unfortunately, this has become exacerbated. And this is another of the responsibilities that we as members of the press have to deal with, not only in Colombia, but also at a global level too. And I believe that this is like an appeal to all of the publishers of the world. Please, let's pay much more attention to this crisis related to gender violence, because this every year is costing us thousands of lives of women that are victims of feminicides and of women and girls that are being raped, not only in armed conflicts, but also at home or at the office and on the streets too. And this is also another of our
Muchas gracias, Jeanette. Y
responsibilities.
sí, muy cierto, y algo que estamos viendo en muchos otros países
Thank you very
también,
much,
y sobre
Jeanette, and that's
todo
something that
a
we're seeing
raíz
in
de
many other
la
countries too.
pandemia.
And in
I'm
particular,
going to switch
with
back
the pandemic.
to Maria and to talk about one. It's one of the important, I think, the important aspects of your work lately, Maria, which has to do, and you were mentioning this earlier, with tech companies and social media in particular. You have been very vocal talking about how these companies they at least allow, if not facilitate, at least allow the circulation of fake news, hatred, attacks, and threats in general and against you in particular. You have suffered them personally, Rappler as a company as well, and the abuse has gone largely unchallenged. What is your appeal to them, and how do you see them? How do you see that they need to change in order to fit into a better model for journalism?
They've destroyed the world as we know it, right? And you know, I think even in 2018, I really Rappler couldn't have existed without Facebook. We embraced the social media platforms when we started in 2012, but in 2014 to 2015, decisions were made in Silicon Valley that has massive global impact. Jeanette talked about gendered violence. Well, when the entire world is inundated with gendered disinformation, when leaders, my leader, the US President Trump, other leaders who have become digital authoritarians, they've gotten power with the power of social media, and then are using the power that is already in their office to essentially the tools of democracy to cave it in from within, right? Well, what happens when these leaders, these men, are themselves sexist at best, misogynists at worst? And that helps pull out, this gendered online hate translates to real world hate and violence. And that takes what Jeanette is saying and exponentially increases risk. In the data that we see here in the Philippines, women are attacked at least 10 times more than men, right? So how do we deal with this? I think we need to understand how technology has changed our world. The social media platforms, all of them, have built into their design filter bubbles, right? The way they grow is by recommending friends of friends. So if you are pro Duterte or pro Trump, right? If you grow your networks, you will move If you're pro Duterte, you will move further to the right. If you're anti Duterte, you will move further left. And what happens as the network grows is that this center, you are creating filter bubbles, and there's no one challenging your facts. When there is an influence operation, so there's the influence operation is coming bottom up on social media. They put in alternative narratives, and in my case, it's journalist equals criminal. That's happened in many countries around the world. But this astroturfing bottom up, the leader comes top down, officials say it, and then the law is weaponized. That happened to us here. And you can see in 4 years how alternative realities are created. It's happening now in the United States. The reality is that the world's largest distributor of news distributes lies laced with anger and hate faster and further than facts. And facts are really boring. It doesn't spread as far and as fast. Fake news, lies, spread 6 times more than the facts. So how do we deal with this? The last point I'll just say with this is that we put in our own data. We put it into our social media platforms. We're live on a social media platform, right? But what happens is that all of that data that is about us, is pulled together by machine learning, and then with artificial intelligence, it takes the essence of who we are, knows us better than we know ourselves, and then takes our moment of vulnerability, the moment of weakness, to a message. And that can be a company or a country, and sells it to the highest bidder. And with the use of micro-targeting, you could do this at scale, right? Not just one person, but scale. So that part has drastically changed geopolitical power. We're seeing this with Russian disinformation that, in Crimea, at the Ukraine in 2014, you can see the disinformation, the reality, and they're saying 2 different things, and yet they both exist at the same time. Now, we know in the United States, for example, that in 2016, Russian disinformation networks targeted both sides of Black Lives Matter, largely unchecked, right? What happened in 4 years? Look at where the United States is today, just a few months. Is it 2 months before the US elections? Without facts, when facts are debatable, you cannot have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. If you don't have any of these, do we even have the agency to select, to choose? Do we have free will? Or is this behavior modification system that social media has become, is that eroding democracy from within? These are all questions, and we need to have stronger legislation. We need to push greater transparency. I always say that, we demand impunity on 2 fronts. The reason we got in trouble in 2016, we demanded impunity from President Duterte and his administration in the drug war. And we also demanded an end to impunity from Facebook.
The role of social media and the formation of bubbles that you were talking about, I think is one of the most important impacts to journalism. And it also has to do with something that John was talking about how brands associate themselves with news. John, you talked about how some advertisers were nervous, for example, at appearing next to bad news. But when we talk about the formation of bubbles, there is also this view for advertisers in appearing in media that is not necessarily popular because it does not tell people what they want to hear. This whole thing about the formation of bubbles means that people are increasingly drawing back into places where they only hear or learn what they want to learn, and not necessarily what they need to learn. And so this brings us back to the key aspect of safeguarding editorial independence. We know what journalism say when they talk about editorial independence from advertisers, but I think from the point of view of an advertiser or a brand manager, how much weight do companies assign to this independence? Maybe in the global view, there is a better understanding, but in local journalism, do you think that there is a risk, for example, that companies that support news organizations might see their interests affected by the coverage, or might see a risk in alienating their constituencies. How does the support for independent journalism need to figure out in the brand's strategic thinking? And do you see differences between local, national, and global brands?
Yeah, Javier, I just wanted to, before I address that, I wanted to expand or agree with one of the points that Maria made, is this divisive nature of the algorithms, where kind of leading you to more divisive content and more divisive content supporting your own point of view. That combined with the fact that local newspapers are going out of business very, very fast. One of the experts called this an extinction event for local newspapers. And there are now a third of the US is in what is called a news desert. That means that they're not served by a local newspaper. And it's been proved through research that if there's no local newspaper, there's more government corruption, less people are prepared to run for office, people are less civilly aware. And what happens when there's no local newspaper? They get their news from social media. And we know that social media is rife with disinformation. So this is another compounding effect that is very, very concerning. And I just wanted to make that point. So it's not just the divisive algorithms, but people turn to local media when they don't, social media when they don't have local newspapers. To your point, how do marketers feel locally and globally about this issue? I've been talking. I'm on the executive team. I'm vice chair of an organization, a big friend of WAN-IFRA called Internews. You're all familiar with it, and we are trying to promote remonetize local news as much as possible. So I speak to marketers about this a lot, and I can tell you that they're concerned about disinformation. They're concerned about the risk that poses, not necessarily directly for a brand, but what it does is it degrades the integrity of the internet, and that's bad news for marketers, because marketers don't want to advertise on a platform that has little integrity and little trust. So that is a real concern for them. And they're also progressive thinkers who support free press and democracy. And as I said before, strategically, they acknowledge the value of quality news. But you have to understand that marketers have got targets to reach. They're part of public companies that have business imperatives and business objectives. So we, as the news industry, need to give them as much hard evidence to take to their markets as possible about the effectiveness of news. And if you allow me to be a little critical, I think news organizations have been too passive in proving their value. I sometimes see it. I think that they see it as a sort of an inevitability that social platforms will take all their revenue. What are we going to do? And so we have these discussions that the things are really bad, but there aren't too many solutions around them. And I really think that there's a significant opportunity for the news organizations around the world, or if it's too difficult to do this globally, we would do this regionally in the US and Europe and in Asia, to work together and to leave competitive differences aside, and to provide marketers with empirical evidence that news is more effective. And there's because of the quality dimension that I mentioned earlier on, there are a number of interesting and very good pieces of research that show that news is more effective. But I think that if the entire news industry came out their corner fighting and proved that news was more effective, I think that we can get some of that. Look, you're not going to get all of that revenue back from Google and Facebook. It's not going to happen. But if we can get 5% of that revenue back, I think it'll save most of the local newspapers that are going out of business. So I really do think that there's an awareness, but what we have to do is we've got to give them evidence to take back to to their global teams to say, here is a justification for me moving 5% of my local revenues back into newspapers or news organizations again. And then we've got to help arm those news organizations to understand programmatic advertising technology, how to make sure that they're more visible in the digital area, because there's still a lot of local newspapers around the world who are not understanding digital, and I think that they'll fall by the wayside if we don't help them understand technology and programmatic advertising.
Thanks, John. You asked if we would allow some criticism. I think we should allow some criticism, particularly if we look at it from the other side, because I think that perspective is really important. I think we can all sort of blend all of this together in terms of the social responsibility that companies have to do with the social responsibility that the media have. And in every aspect of this conversation that Maria and Jeanette have touched on, violence, authoritarianism, repression, gender issues, etc. But there is undoubtedly a social responsibility that I think that companies need to determine and define and see how they are going to use it. So we have about 15-20 minutes left in the panel. So we're going to do a quick couple of rounds with posing the same question to all of you. One has to do with this year, the other has to do with next year. See what 2021 has in store for us. But the first one, and this is for all three of you, where or what are the areas that you think we must remain more vigilant in the fight for press freedom? And how do you think the COVID-19 pandemic is going to affect it? Jeanette, podemos empezar contigo.
Frente a eso, yo quisiera retomar algo que
Well,
acaba
I
de
would like to go back to something that has just been pointed out by John, and which I believe is a very important issue, and that is that never are we going to be able to separate the economic support we need to deliver information so that we can provide some kind of support to newspapers, especially the regional newspapers that still exist, that still survive in relation to the new digital platforms in terms of advertisements. And I think that this is one of the major challenges we have to deal with too. And what can't happen is that in the case of the smaller media, the smaller organizations, and some national newspapers in our respective countries, what we can't do is link this exercise of journalism only to the attention of advertisements, because I think that would be harmful as regards delivering information. And this is one of the additional enemies we have to do something about that goes against the freedom of the press. Because when you have to associate your advertising pattern, especially what is provided by the government, when you have to adapt that to the way you work as a journalist, that means that you are then facing lots of risks because of doing so. And in many of these countries, or many regions of these countries, where the pandemic has had a very big economic impact in terms of circulation, it's one of the issues that they are dealing with right now. And I think that we have to be alert. We first have to unite, and we have to try to work as a journalist properly, and we have to provide the necessary support too. And secondly, well, advertisements cannot always be related to positive news in a newspaper, because many times some advertisements had to be cancelled because the brands do not want to appear next to victims or dead people or next to disasters in a newspaper. And that is one of the issues that we have to defend. And I think that it's one of the major challenges too we have in terms of the future, because the pandemic, let's say, has now opened up a completely new path as regards how we are supposed to deliver information, and also in terms of the challenges we have to deal with when we deliver information. But it's also telling us what it is we have to do with the new technologies too, because we cannot allow truthful information to be replaced by the immediacy of the social media. Because anybody today, anybody with a mobile phone or with a tablet Anybody can deliver information, and we've already seen at an international scale how harmful that is, how bad that is. So this is why we have to reinforce the freedom of the press, and we have to strengthen the media too, especially the small media, the small organizations that end up being the only tool that can actually provide solid information in the communities in different regions too.
Maria, you want to follow up? You have to unmute yourself.
Right. Sorry about that. I'll pick up a few strands from what both John and Jeanette said. I think the first is that the financial incentives are upside down, and that is the reason you are seeing an upside down world, right? The financial incentives, if you look at the second quarter for Facebook, they made about $19 billion, right? For Q2. So they're on track. If you multiply that times 4, they'll be on track to do better than last year, $10 billion more. I mean, these numbers mean nothing to a journalist because we don't do that. And the reason we don't get these types of numbers is because we protect the public sphere, which requires humans to do it, right? And let me connect that. Like, why is that? Because the systems of delivery, and this is the biggest problem. Even in the United States, at least 69% of Americans get their news from social media. The kinds of algorithms that are there prioritizes, and this is the 2018 Science magazine that showed lies spread faster on social media. It is by a factor of, oh my gosh, 10 to 20 times more. So you are 70% more likely to retweet a lie than you are a really boring fact. It's not interesting enough for you, or you're not manipulated emotionally, you're not angry, you don't have hate. In fact, even the definition of hate speech has to really, so there are two things they have to do. They have to become the gatekeepers because they already are. So don't just take the money, don't abdicate the responsibility, do the work that the gatekeeper does, which means protect the public sphere, protect the facts. The other reason why I don't think, John, I don't think news groups, there is a flight to quality for consumers because lies can kill in the time of COVID, but we don't micro-target in the way that the big giants can, because we haven't gathered that data in the way they have, and we don't trace people beyond our sites. And frankly, as a journalist, I think it's unethical to do some of that because it is insidious manipulation, right? Advertising in our old world is seen by everyone. So it's very hard to manipulate everyone individually at scale. And that's the biggest problem. And that's part of the reason I think globally we are faced with a challenge. Are we going to allow insidious manipulation of our minds, these types of influence operations, which will ultimately, we're on the road to killing the people who protect the facts, the journalists. I mean, literally and physically, no, hopefully not physically, we're still working really hard, but this is a problem.
John?
Yeah, Maria, we could talk for ages about this. It's a very, very interesting points of view. We'll never have the data, the press will never have the data to compete with the big social platforms, but neither do we need it. I think on a local level, the fact that you're advertising a local business in a local newspaper with all of that trust, I still think counts for a lot. Even if Google and Facebook take 60 or 70% of the revenue, there is still some left for us. And we may not be able to micro-target. Maybe we shouldn't even be micro-targeting. I think the large press groups, the Murdochs of this world, and that do collect first-party data, and I think if we can use it responsibly and literally don't track every movement, you can understand your audience better and give journalists a sense of what the issues of the day are, what people think. So I think data could be used in a positive sense. I think it's being manipulated and not used in a positive sense by some. What I would say about the pandemic, I think the biggest effect that pandemic has had is it scared off advertisers, as we mentioned earlier on. And when I talked a little earlier about the news organizations getting together. There are to create tools and to create justification that news is effective. There's technology available right now that the news organizations could use that allows advertisers, that would allow advertisers to advertise if they're worried about death counts and refrigeration trucks in New York and those things where I don't think anybody wants to advertise adjacent to them, whether it's harmful or not. You can avoid those and advertise in sports. So you can avoid it in gardening or in entertainment. It still means that you can support newspapers. It still means that your ads get there. But there are these tools that are available that frankly newspapers haven't provided that the big platforms have. So the big platforms have, I guess, because they have money, have advanced their tools, their technology beyond what news can do, and that's exacerbated the situation. So rather than throw our hands up and say, "Oh my goodness, we're all doomed," I think that we can come out and say, "How do we work together to create the tools to provide the advertisers a choice to advertise wherever they want to?" But right now they don't have choice. So what they've done is they've abandoned press completely. Right, in February or March, most of our clients were saying, let's get out of press because we don't have the tools to advertise next to the content that we think is safe. We educated them, and luckily by the end of April, they were back in again because we proved to them that you can use other forms of technology to target your advertising in other sections. But just a good example of how the pandemic has affected us. But again, let's get together and develop that technology to offer it to advertisers.
Thanks, John. We're wrapping up. I realized something that in the several years that I have attended these kinds of discussions, especially at the WAN-IFRA congresses, when we talked about press freedom and the threats to press freedom, it used to be from, you would call the traditional sources, authoritarian governments, guerrillas, like Jeanette mentioned in Colombia, drug cartels like in Mexico or in other countries. I can recall one panel where we had talked so much about social media being a threat to press freedom and tech companies being a threat to press freedom. I think this is opening up one of the biggest challenges, because I mean, we know that it was there and we've seen it. I just don't feel or can't recall another moment where we have talked so much about it, and I think it's kind of a scary prospect if we go down the road, with the status quo in the way that social media interacts with journalism. And so I think that kind of sets the stage for the final question, which is also for all three of you. I think one of the things that we can all agree in the panel and out there is that we all want 2020 to end really badly. But I don't think that 2021 is looking much better. I mean, the outlook is kind of looking bleak as a continuation of the struggles from this year. So give us your sense is there any cause for optimism? Is there any cause for being positive? If you can give us 1, 2, 3 reasons to be cheerful about next year. Jeanette, ¿quieres empezar?
Well, the first thing is that based on my difficult experience, what should motivate us most, and I think that the biggest source of optimism can be found in the fact that we can carry on communicating, because as long as we have a voice to speak with, and as long as we can raise our voice and speak up loud, I think that there's still hope. And we have a very big advantage, those of us that are here on this panel, and those of us that form part of WAN-IFRA and are watching us today, because their voice can be listened to by other people. We are very fortunate because we are working for the media. It doesn't make any difference whether it's a large or small, or if it uses a digital platform, or if it's still based on printed newspapers, but we have a voice to speak with. And I think that it's a reason that makes us feel hopeful. And that voice should make it possible to make people visible. That is our audience I'm referring to, because we have a duty in relation to these people that believe in us and that can also manage their lives in relation to what we have to deliver to them. And I think that this should be a more than solid enough reason to feel hopeful in the midst of this crisis, not only because of the pandemic, but also because of the many things that the world has to cope with at this point in time, especially from an economic perspective, because I think that this is what is going to affect us most as regards the near future. So that, for me, is one of the main motivations to carry on believing in this. And my second motivation is that although I know that it's very difficult to address this technological change, but I think that it's a wonderful opportunity to make the proper use of the tools that this technological world is offering us. Never before did mankind have within its reach this possibility of being able to broadcast things or transmit things and to carry out transformations through the tools that we have at our disposal nowadays. We have to make a proper use of these tools. And I know that we still have to deal with many, many challenges. That means that we will have to cope with lots of problems as professionals. But we also have a wonderful tool in our hands that we must use, that we must apply, and that has to be taken into account as regards our social responsibility as journalists.
Gracias, Jeanette. Maria, give us your reasons. Your legal struggles would make us think that you don't have too many good reasons to look forward to 2021. So I'd really like to hear what you're optimistic about.
Javier, thank you. I mean, I have 3 reasons to be optimistic. And, I look at the legal problems as a byproduct of the first one, which is the battle for truth, right? If we don't have facts, then everything else crumbles beyond it. So that's what I'm really focused on. So the first is, I think globally, journalists have largely done our jobs. We have held the line in terms of holding power to account and demanding facts. I think in general, we've held that line. Jeanette, congratulations. Under, what great sacrifice you upheld the journalistic principles, the standards and ethics. I think the second is tech. We are a partner of Facebook in the Philippines. We're a fact-checking partner, and we're a fact-checking partner because I don't think that it will ever go back to the way it was. Technology will be here to stay. And so I continue to appeal for the enlightened self-interest of Silicon Valley, of these huge tech platforms, because it is not in their interest to help usher in a decade of fascism, to help the death of democracy. That isn't in their interest. This is something they're grappling with, and I hope to push them. I hope they move faster, right? And then finally, the third is to take up what John said, which is in January 2019, I was one of the journalists who rang in the bell for 2019, which was a really horrific year for me, the arrests and everything else. But it was also a year that proved Nietzsche was right. What doesn't kill you will make you stronger. Rappler actually made a little money despite the attacks of government, right? So what? Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. It is a brave new world. And we need to create something better than what used to be there, because we want to make it more equal. We want to make it more sustainable. The fact that there are fires in California and typhoons in Manila, right? We're going to have to deal with this. And part of the problem, climate change is still a problem, is because of the way we all reported false equivalents at some point in time. And that last part of collaborating as truth tellers, we really have to bring in civil society. I think the question everyone in a democracy needs to ask today is, what are you willing to sacrifice for the truth? Because journalists like Jeanette have sacrificed a lot. We are sacrificing to bring you the facts. So what do you need to keep democracy alive?
Thanks, Maria. John, do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the reasons to be optimistic about 2021 is the fact that it's not 2020. It's not 2020. There's always a new dawn, and I think there's a sort of an optimism. But I have to say, listening to Jineth and Maria, that's what inspires me: the bravery and the commitment, and the journalists that are on this call. That's why we should be optimistic about 2021. We need to get more journalists, more feet on the ground, more people in local news, and we haven't had time to go into it today, but we've got some solutions that we hope will help local newspapers in particular, and I'm optimistic that we can make and measure a little bit of what we do there. And the last thing I would say is the people running these big social media companies are not bad people. I think what's happened is that these social media have grown like weeds, and they really, I think if there's a criticism, they're not in full control of this beast that they're riding. There are more than 2 billion interactions on Facebook, Instagram, and every day there are 500 hours of new video uploaded every minute on YouTube. Can you imagine trying to get your hands, and this is all user-generated content. I think so I know that they're spending hundreds of millions, or if not billions of dollars to try and address some of these algorithmic disinformation issues. They don't want the criticisms that we're leveling at them. It attracts government intervention. It attracts, if you have a look at what Stop Hateful Profit boycott did with Facebook, it didn't even dent their profits, but I think what it did is it dented their brand value, and they don't want that. And so there are a number of organizations working with them, yours included, to see how we can address it. And I do think we haven't turned that corner, but I think everybody's working very, very hard to make the elections as free and as free of disinformation as they can. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. But this has got our attention more than it ever has before, and I think that's a good thing. And it's probably as a result of people like Jineth and Maria and all of the journalists around the world who are raising this issue to the heights that they are.
Thank you, John. Well, I think we'll end with that, and I want to thank you, all three of you, again for joining us, and everybody who is joining us out there. It's really been a privilege to share this with two remarkable journalists and an industry leader such as John. Jeanette, felicidades de nueva cuenta por el premio. Y nos vamos a mandar esto a Zaragoza. Before that, if anybody wants to have anything final to say, or just okay. Nos vamos a Zaragoza.
Thank you for the invitation.
Nos vamos a Zaragoza con Fernando de Yarza, presidente de WAN-IFRA, presidente de ENEO, que está celebrando su aniversario, nuestro anfitrión virtual, y sus majestades los reyes de España. Muchísimas gracias a todos.
Their Majesties, President of the Government of Aragon, Minister of Development, authorities, Managing Director of the World Association of News Publishers, publishers and journalists present here, ladies and gentlemen, friends, many thanks for being here with us today in these difficult times that we are living due to the pandemic, which we need to face with determination and optimism. Thank you this is really why I am so especially thankful to you for accompanying us in such an important and emotional event for Heraldo de Aragon, the NEO Group, and the World Association of News Publishers. Allow me to address the first words to our host today, Mrs. Pilar de Yarza, that has just announced that she will promptly pass the presidency of Heraldo de Aragon on to my sister, Paloma, who will thus become the sixth woman that consecutively and without interruption during the past 80 years would be at the head of this journal. Dear Pilar, we have become a very great group, humbly and with a lot of effort. We have diversified the company and we are over 2,000 people, but we still have a family company DNA. And this is why on behalf of my siblings and on my behalf, I want to say to you and to our father and vice president, Fernando de Yarza Montpellon, that it has been a privilege to work closely with you all these years, learning the wonderful profession of publishing. You can be secure in the knowledge of that the values and principles that you have defended, the ones that you have fought for and advocated all your life and that you have passed on to us, are the same as our grandparents did with you, or passed on to you, and they are safeguarded. We are well aware of our commitment with our land, Aragon. And I would like to congratulate the awardees today, both from Heraldo de Aragon and by the World Association of News Publishers. Jeanette Bedoya, who is a Colombian journalist and activist in support of women's rights. She represents courage, determination, and rigor. She embodies perfectly the values acknowledged by the Golden Pen. The Human Values Prize has been collected by the President of the College of Physicians and the President of the Nursing College of Zaragoza, Aragon, in representation of all the groups, the private and public groups that, like the health professionals, the pharmacists, and security forces, have been at the forefront of this struggle and even risking their lives. In such a special year for Heraldo, its journalism award honors, those who made the journal great, Antonio Montpellon, and holds the ace in awarded women for publishers with a long tradition and vocation. Luca de Tena sisters and their ABC have projected the oldest national journal in Spain to the digital era, always loyal to the values and principles that we have sustained over time. And Carmen Serra, who rather seems to come from Aragon than from Mallorca due to her perseverance and determination, also took up her father's baton, the one belonging to the deeply missed Don Pedro Serra. Together with the other Pedro Royan Serra, and the rest of the family, they show a vocation, an unwavering vocation of service with the Balearic Society. Blanca García Montenegro also sets an example of commitment with her homeland, and according to the journal's name, with El Progreso, the progress of Lugo. Together with her daughter, Blanca de Cora, they confirmed that in the digital age, journalism that is close to its readers counts on the trust and support of the advertisers and the readers. These two Blancas are a marvelous saga of publishing women, and we share a romantic vision of understanding journalism with them. A little more than a year ago, I had the honor to follow on the presidency of the World Association of News Publishers. I succeeded our admired master, Michael Golden Sulzberger, who was the owner of the New York Times. This time has not been an easy one. For the last months, we have suffered the case of an epidemic that seems to be more a medieval epidemic that has made us see our weakness, how weak our dreams and projects can be. We have, in these months of this year, more than 30 journalists have been murdered, and still 80 are missing, and 500 are in prison. In these moments, there are many media that are specialized to distribute lies with the aim of manipulating citizens. And we have never had to struggle so much to keep truthful and quality journalism. But we will win this battle and this war, with no doubt. The role played by WAN-IFRA in defense of free press and the search for sustainable models of journalism and quality journalism, it is essential. And I want to congratulate the WAN team led by the CEO, Vincent Perignon, and the executive board and the world board, as well as our workers and collaborators in the 5 continents. As for Heraldo de Aragón, well, this is having this or celebrating its 125th anniversary. For 3 centuries, it has navigated with 5 generations of the Yarza-Monteon family in a republic, 2 monarchies, 3 coups d'etat. And the world has lived in these years a lot of programs, but a lot of tragedies as well. For my family, information is not only a right, it's a way to understand life. I want to thank Ibercaja, our partners, for the last 20 years, their commitment and loyalty with the project. We are independent, but we are not neutral. And for us, the secret of the continued existence of the newspapers is truly as simple to formulate as to fulfill. It is about maintaining the identity and the distinguishing marks of the company, the aims, the principles, the ideals. One of these distinguishing marks that is part of the Afgeneos genetic code is the search for good journalism, material progress and moral progress of our society, mutual understanding among citizens and institutional stability in our country. This is why, for us, it is one of the essential foundations of this prosperity is parliamentary monarchy, embodied today by their majesties, which is an essential pillar of Spanish democracy. We know that Your Majesty, you are, above all, an exemplary man, a true statesman, a man worried about performing well your task and convinced of the fact that what he is doing is fair and right. Task that you carry out tenaciously and cautiously. Heraldo de Aragón wants to express their solid and determined loyalty with Your Majesty, your family, and the institution that you embody that has led our nation through the best times that we ever knew. Thank you very much. I ask Pilar and Fernando de Yarza, José Luis Aguirre, and the President of Aragon and the Minister of Transports to please come to the stage to accompany me. Guided by this loyalty and admiration, the Heraldo de Aragón board passed unanimously the board's proposal on behalf of workers, managers, and shareholders of this firm to give their majesties the extraordinary award Heraldo 125th anniversary in acknowledgement to their commitment in defense of the rule of law, freedom of expression, and an ongoing support to a free and plural press. President of the Government of Aragon, Minister of Transports, Mobility and Urban Agenda Authorities, dear President of the Heraldo de Aragon, Pilar, dear President of the ENEO Group and the World Association of News Publishers, WAN-IFRA, I greet all your family, the present and the absent ones. President of Ibercaja, dear awardees, ladies and gentlemen, on my behalf and on behalf of the Queen, I would like to express to you, firstly, our joy for coming back to Aragon, and in this occasion to preside here in Villanueva de Gallego this important celebration. It is such an honor to do it. Heraldo de Aragon is celebrating its 125 years of life as a journal and as a company. So many, many congratulations to you. We hope that there will be many more anniversaries that you and we will be able to celebrate in the future. You wanted this event also to recognize persons and institutions that with their committed work are real reference in their different scopes, the communication and the healthcare. I would refer to them very promptly. But in this occasion, the Queen and I are also receiving the extraordinary Heraldo 125th Anniversary Award, which is a distinction that we very, very highly value personally, and that we receive with a lot of emotional and excitement, and emotional feeling and excitement, and with enormous gratitude, because it is a great boost in our will to serve Spain, always under the values and principles that are embodied in our Constitution. Thank you very much, and warm thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, the emotional homage of today's, it is especially dedicated to more than 100 years old communication means that has followed day after day all an era of our history. It is an homage to all the professionals and the workers that have made it possible, and together as an homage to a family that has supported this task. 125 years ago, the first issue of the Heraldo de Aragon came out, and the fact that we are here commemorating this date is the fruit of the will of 5 generations that have worked together for professional integrity and the vocation to inform, as well as guided by their love to their region and to Spain. The Heraldo is today what has always been, a very clear voice advocating for liberty and freedom, a voice committed to all citizens, not only in Aragon, but all in the whole country. The Heraldo, El Heraldo, is summing up the example of the fact that facts should be informed with perseverance, conviction, and firmness. It is precisely what we are thanking today. In the history of these 125 years, we need to acknowledge Pilar de Yarza, that has announced that will leave the presidency of the Heraldo. Time passes and generations succeed one after another, but what does not change is the spirit uniting them. Our sincerest gratefulness and gratitude to Pilar, an admirable woman that has devoted her life to the family company with perseverance, tenaciousness, and great nobility. All this has been done with the support of her brother, Fernando de Yarza Montpellon, with whom she has worked tirelessly. Thank you very much, Pilar and Fernando. Coinciding with this special date, we give the Antonio Montpellon Award and the Award to Human Values and Knowledge. Our sincerest congratulations, firstly, to the 4 Spanish publishers, Catalina and Soledad Luca de Tena, Carmen Serra and Blanca Garcia, who have received the Montpellon Award. Thank you to people like you. Many citizens can now understand better the importance of the concept of freedom of expression and freedom of information that are embodied in our Constitution and for which you have always worked in an admirable way. This is a task that you have always carried out every day for many, many years. You have done it because you felt it was right to do so, because you had a vocation for it, because you felt it necessary for any free and democratic society. Your personal and professional commitment makes your work not to be limited to a specific scope in our country, but it is known largely by society, as this award is proving. Truly, your vocation has led you to developing formidable professional careers in the scope of communication, of media. Many congratulations to every one of you with whom you share hopes and concerns. The prize or the award to Human Values and Knowledge has been received by the doctors and nurses colleges in Zaragoza, which are institutions that represent all those people that have been working in the healthcare scope, which has been an expression of a continuous and ongoing, tireless and sacrificed work in a context where the COVID-19 pandemic has meant an immense challenge in the healthcare field. Your absolute dedication and devotion deserves this award, as well as our permanent gratitude and admiration. Finally, this event coincides with the giving of the awards of the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers, the WAN-IFRA organization, worldwide known, of journalists that for the first time is headed by a Spaniard, Fernando de Yarza López Madrazo. It is a reference, a benchmark institution on an international level, not only because its dimensions, it represents 18 different publications in 120 countries, but due to its perseverance in the protection of free press. The world needs today, more than ever, journalists and journalism companies that commit with truth and reality of fact. WAN-IFRA is giving the award to Jeanette Bedoya, a Colombian journalist that has stood out, especially because of the claim of violence against women, and we want to send her our most affectionate congratulations. In such a day like today, in an event with journalists and communication entrepreneurs, I would not like to end my speech without acknowledging and recognizing the role played by the mass media that prove constantly their extraordinary capacity to transform themselves, to adapt to changes, not only in relation to the political, economic, cultural, or technological fields or scopes, but especially with the social field. In this constant search to keep your connection with society, to what you serve and where you evolve, you have not renounced to your principles and the reason of your being. This is the reason why you are so important in democratic or for democratic societies where informative pluralism is a guarantee of their own existence, together with free expression and freedom of information, which are constitutional values. With no doubt, your work as journalists lies at the base of our democratic system. It needs a responsible, rigorous, critical, and independent journalism. We encourage you to defend with the best kind of journalism, democracy in the rule of law, which has been constructed or built step by step and with numerous difficulties. We all have that responsibility, but your responsibility as informers is essential. Thank you very much. And congratulations.